Imagine everything you own, or at least everything you think you need to hold on to, is in your pocket and tucked into your socks. You left your home this morning knowing you might never again return. You wore your uniform to work. You might have drawn too much attention to yourself otherwise. You have a long journey ahead, but you can't let anyone around you know you're planning on leaving. You decided to wear your thickest pair of socks inside your boots. In your left sock, you hide some spare bandages. In your right boot, you tuck the blade of a small shovel. You have some loose rat poison in your jacket pocket, just in case you're caught. You realize that your journey is a one-way mission. You'll either make it out alive or die. There's no coming back. Today is the day you're going to try to cross the border. And not just any border, but the most heavily armed border in the world. You're standing at the 38th parallel, the symbolic border between two nations which are still, 70 years after their initial conflict, technically at war. The border between North and South Korea is called the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ. It is 150 miles long and approximately 2.5 miles wide. Fortunately, your journey will span the shorter of those two distances, so long as you don't get lost or captured. The DMZ is the ceasefire zone along the Korean peninsula that separates the two nations. Both sides fortify the border with fences topped with barbed wire. They're actively guarded by troops, and some sections of the fence surge with enough electricity to physically send you flying. You've spent enough time looking out across the grasslands and deltas spanning the uninhabited stretch of land. As a North Korean soldier, you've stood watch and plotted your path for months. For the past few years, you've been told countless times about the consequences of defection. In fact, you've seen more than a few people die just steps into no man's land. Some were shot by guards within seconds. Others made it past the tree line, but the echoes of a mine explosion made their fate clear. You come from a similar background to most of the men you work with. You all hail from affluent families. Once you make it across, you'll learn that was by design. Knowing you would be staring at the DMZ all day towards South Korea, the government recruits sons from well-to-do families who have no reason to want to leave. Life is supposed to be good, and staring at the freedom beyond the barbed wire is supposed to be mindless, not inspiring. But your mind is set. You see people starving every day. People being taken from their homes and never heard from again. You are going to run. Your patrol buddy just began pacing the opposite direction. A fog had begun setting in about an hour earlier. You knew when you woke up to see the city in a blackout, no electricity would be pulsing through the normally deadly fence. There's an emergency door just steps away that could get you on the other side. You place your gun on the ground. You open the door and shut it silently behind you. Then you run. There's no way to know where to step. There could be mines anywhere. You're darting between trees, and your legs feel autonomous from your brain. They're working on a survival instinct until you reach a second fence. You spot an area where animals have dug a pass through, and you begin digging with the shovel blade and your hand to create an opening wide enough to pass through. You scratch your face on the wire crossing through when you thought you could hear yelling in the distance. Over the course of the next 4 hours, you wade through 200 feet of the Imjin River in waist-deep waters. You trip on the root of a tree and badly sprain your ankle. You duck and hide from a patrol vehicle. You'll later learn that it was heading to the infamous Bridge of No Return. Eventually, you come across another fence, but at this point, you are out of energy to dig through. You toss your jacket up to cover the barbed wire on the top, but by the time you gather your strength to throw your body to the other side, you cut your hands and cheek. Exhaustion and pain are all you can feel at this point. You have no energy left as you see a soldier running towards you with their gun pointed. You squint to look at their uniform, deciding whether or not it's time for the rat poison. The flag on their arm is foreign to you. They're speaking with an unfamiliar dialect. You raise your hands in surrender and can't help but smile because you made it. According to South Korea's Unification Ministry, more than 33,000 people have defected from North Korea. Some make the journey via the Yellow Sea or the Sea of Japan. Most travel to China or Southeast Asia first and then attempt to immigrate, though they risk arrest and return to North Korea if caught. While crossing the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea is the most direct and immediate path to freedom, it is one of the most dangerous journeys in the world. Only a few live to tell the tale of doing so. Why are people so willing to risk life and limb to cross the border from North Korea to South? The former is governed by an authoritarian communist regime with limited personal freedoms. Poverty and starvation affect millions. South Korea, on the other hand, is a highly modernized nation with a bustling economy and human rights protected by the Constitution of the Republic of Korea. Just miles apart, people live entirely different lives based on the foods they eat, the thoughts they encounter, the healthcare they receive, and the rights they enjoy. People might try to cross the border for economic, political, religious, ideological, social, or cultural reasons. As the differences between North and South Korea are so stark, it's not hard to understand why people are willing to risk the deadly journey for the chance at a better life. People all around the world cross borders for the prospect of creating a better life for themselves and their family. Historically, people have been driven from their homes fleeing conflict, whether that's a military battle that has encroached on their doorstep or neighbors who disagree with their religious preferences. People have willingly left their homes looking to be a part of a community with different values and more economic opportunity. Borders are symbols of homes left behind, milestones in treacherous journeys, and hints of a new beginning. Today, immigration around the world is driven by many factors. Military conflicts between nations, civil wars, environmental factors, and individual persecutions force or encourage people to pack up their lives and cross the border into another country. Coincidentally, the countries that are rattled by crises that turn its citizens into refugees are often the countries with the most dangerous border crossings. Let's have a look at some of the world's most dangerous border crossings. When two countries are at war with each other, it makes sense that traveling between those countries could be a bumpy road. North and South Korea are at war with each other, although neither even recognizes the other as an independent nation. The DMZ itself is not dangerous. The real threat in crossing the Korean border lies in the people and weapons used in the area. For other nations which are at war, borders are contentious sites, as they serve as the barriers keeping the enemy out. Borders help nations define the area and peoples they are fighting for, as well as those they are fighting against. Historically, military conflicts tended to be fought on battlefields and designated areas away from civilians. Of course, that didn't mean that civilians and their infrastructure would be spared from fighting. Just look at the Mongol or Roman empires. What was being fought over tended to be clearly delineated, but who was affected by fighting tends to extend beyond warring parties. As a matter of fact, border disputes have been a cause of many wars. And while a map of the world just 300 years ago looks entirely unrecognizable to a modern-day person, humans are willing to go to war to defend where borders are drawn. Borders indicate contained social, cultural, and national communities, but they just as effectively indicate who ought to be kept out. The fine line between inclusion and exclusion creates tensions which sometimes escalate into all-out wars. In some ways, today is no different from hundreds of years ago. Militarized conflicts between two nations or ideological groups can make crossing the borders very difficult. On October 7, 2023, crossing the border between Israel and Palestine became more deadly than ever before. Known as the Green Line, the border between Israel and Palestine has been in flux for centuries. The land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Seas holds sacred power in the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faiths. Nations which have been formed around some of the religious groups argue about their right to the land. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 supported the creation of a Jewish state in the region, known as Palestine. This helped set the foundation for the nation we know today as Israel. During the Holocaust, the Jewish population in Palestine tripled from 10% of the total population to 30%. As the Jews fled a genocide led by Hitler and the Nazis, and the Jewish population in the area swelled, some native Palestinians began fearing they would be displaced. Britain had been granted administrative authority over the region by the League of Nations, which gave them the power to decide what peoples could live where. However, the British mandate over Palestine was set to expire around 1947, and the recently formed United Nations proposed the creation of a separate Jewish state within Palestine, though the new nation would have taken up more than half of Palestine's land. Conflict inevitably broke out between Zionists who were in favor of a Jewish state and the Palestinians who were looking to retain their land. The First Arab-Israeli War broke out after Israel declared their independence in 1948. Over the course of the last 75 years, conflict has plagued the region. While the exact location of borders has been ignored or even rejected by some parties, the divide between Israel and the Gaza Strip is incredibly dangerous. The Gaza Strip is a region bordering Israel, Egypt, and the Mediterranean Sea. Only 25 miles long and just over 6 wide, Gaza is geographically small, and with a population of over 2.2 million, people are packed in tightly. Given the tensions between some Palestinians and Israelis, both areas have historically had heavily armed guards monitoring the border. Additionally, there have been landmines dotted along the border that are not clearly marked or fenced off, making it possible that a well-intentioned walk might become a death march. When Hamas, an Islamic militant group that governs the Gaza Strip, launched a surprise assault on civilians in Israel, the conflict escalated. When thousands of people in Israel were tortured, raped, burned, murdered, and taken hostage, the nation of Israel declared war against Hamas. The Israeli Defense Forces have since retaliated, with a ground offensive and airstrikes that are estimated to have murdered thousands of civilians and Hamas militants alike. As war rages on, the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip has become more dangerous than ever before. So much of the conflict is rooted in disagreements about where Israel ends and Palestine begins, and who has the right to certain land. In a time when your national affiliation makes you an enemy to another, traveling near the border could be life-threatening. Per the Geneva Conventions, innumerable war crimes have been committed over the course of the conflict so far, taking children as hostages, using civilians as human shields, and indiscriminately slaughtering non-militants. Crossing the threshold between Israel and Gaza is a recipe for confronting an armed individual from one side or another. That is, if you aren't killed in an airstrike by a stray bullet or taken prisoner first. Israel's southern border with Egypt is also an incredibly dangerous border to navigate. Even before the war between Israel and Hamas, Israeli Defense Forces traditionally monitored the border closely in aims to shutter drug smuggling operations. Despite the increased military presence, fighting often breaks out because of the terrorist activity around the southern border with Egypt. As the IDF has redirected many troops for the offensive within Gaza's borders, there might be less monitoring than ever before in the Sinai Peninsula. When crossing between two nations who are at war with each other, your reception on one side might not be pleasant. While your reasons for crossing might be fleeing for safety, you could be suspected of trying to infiltrate the country you're entering. Crossing borders looks easy on a map, but there's no guarantee about the reception you might receive after crossing. Let's head now a little north, to another section of the world plagued by war: Russia and Ukraine. Like the situation in Israel, the conflict here in Central Europe has ties to cultural, religious, and political differences. This has all ballooned into one country invading another under the guise of a special military operation. When the conflict began in February of 2022, President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Putin said what is happening today does not come out of a desire to infringe on the interests of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. It is related to the protection of Russia itself from those who took Ukraine hostage and are trying to use it against our country and its people. Let's backtrack. The region of the world known today as Ukraine has been historically inhabited by Kievan Rus people, with both Scandinavian and Russian ties. At some points, it was part of Poland, and at others, Lithuania. For a while, it was within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. In 1922, it was incorporated into the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic, the USSR. At this point, Ukraine's ties to Russia were strengthened. However, the relationship was not always a positive one. Under Joseph Stalin's rule, millions died due to famine, and more than 1 million Ukrainian Jews would be persecuted and murdered during World War II. Even under the umbrella of the USSR, Ukrainians maintained a sense of cultural identity independent of Russia. In 1954, to commemorate the 300th anniversary of Ukraine's joining the Russian Empire, Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the Soviets, gifted the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. 36 years later, in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence from Russia. It was a bold move, but meant that Ukraine's population, which was approximately 1/3 the size of Russia's, could address the problems facing them, rather than being lumped in with a huge federation. In 2014, however, Russia annexed Crimea, stirring tensions in the region. Pro-Russian forces took over the Crimean Autonomous Assembly and held a referendum about becoming part of Russia again. According to Russia, an overwhelming majority wanted back in. Fast forward 8 years, and Putin launches a war against Ukraine, though he doesn't call it that. Between artillery fire, airstrikes, tank attacks, and landmines, people die left and right all around the border between Ukraine and Russia. At least 10,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine. According to the UN, as of May 2023, there are nearly 5.1 million internally displaced people in Ukraine and 6.2 million refugees who have been recorded globally. In the first 18 months of the conflict, it's estimated that 500,000 troops have died or been wounded. Reservists and active-duty service members from both sides have been fighting along the border. While many who ideologically opposed Russia's war in Ukraine tried to air their dissent or even tried to flee to avoid participation, the state-controlled media and authoritarian regime in Russia shut that down. Russia drafted tens of thousands of men to join the military. Recently, they changed laws mandating that men from the ages of 18 to 30, rather than 27, can be called into military service. They also changed laws so that conscription summons could be served online instead of in person. The day a conscription summons is served, it is illegal for a man to leave the country. Russia has borders with 14 countries, making it difficult for the government to monitor every road or footpath out of the country. But the border with Ukraine is by far the most dangerous to attempt to cross. The border between Ukraine and Russia is a one-way corridor. According to Ukraine's state border guards, all checkpoints on the border with Russia are closed. However, the Kolotylovka-Pokrovka checkpoint on the border area of Russian Belgorod Oblast and Ukraine's Sumy Oblast allows Ukrainian nationals to pass through from Russian-occupied areas. But the Russians have closed off all traffic heading in their direction, so only a limited number of slow-moving vehicles and pedestrians can pass through, so long as they're moving from Russia into Ukraine. Options are extremely limited for people looking to flee from Russia to Ukraine. To avoid getting caught in the crosshairs of the on-ground fighting, people prefer to take a route through Georgia, then the Black Sea. The fastest, most direct option is to try the Kolotylovka-Pokrovka humanitarian corridor, located between Russia's Belgorod region and Ukraine's Sumy region. It's estimated that more than 100 people pass through it daily, even though the journey itself is psychologically challenging. On the Russian checkpoint, people are searched by Russian border guards and put through a so-called filtration test. Security guards screen their phone, save copies of their fingerprints, and even subject people to strip searches. Once someone passes, they then have to walk the ominous path across no man's land. No vehicles may pass, so people must hold their possessions. People must help children navigate and support the elderly making the journey on the gravel. All the while, artillery shots still fire at random. If you make it to the other side, you're picked up by an evacuation bus, which takes you to another processing center. Now, Ukrainian soldiers question your motives and examine your identification documents. Thousands travel the route without passports or national documentation, making the process all the more difficult. While the conflicts in the Middle East and Eastern Europe concentrate a great deal of violence across a relatively small geographic border, international wars in other parts of the world see violence over far greater stretches. Take, for example, the Sahel region in Africa. Reaching from Senegal in the northwest to Sudan, the Sahel is a kind of transitional zone between the dry Sahara Desert to the more humid savannas in the south. A traditionally dry area, the Niger and Senegal rivers flow through the region, making it possible for pasture lands to be watered. Over the last 100 years, population increases in the area have led to increased soil erosion. The land's fertility has been strained like never before to feed growing populations and create infrastructure to house them all. Extreme droughts have led to long stretches of famine in the area. The sub-Saharan region of Africa has one of the highest rates of population growth in the world. According to the UN in 2017, the 6 countries making up the Sahel have an approximate population of 90 million people. That is set to jump to 240 million by 2050. It's also estimated that 80% of the region's population live on less than $2 a day, making it one of the world's poorest areas. Beyond the pressures brought on by the at times inhospitable climate conditions and a fast-growing population, the region is made significantly more dangerous by violent extremists, terrorism, and government coups. Let's start in 1960, when Mali gained its independence from France. As the new national government aimed to legally, politically, and culturally unify their nation under a common nationality, it became clear that some pastoral communities of Arab and Tuareg people wanted nothing to do with it. Many of the benefits that the government promised to deliver simply wouldn't reach many people. Classist and economic differences between the North and the South amplified the antagonism in the region, as many saw the idea of a national government as trying to impose an elitist agenda on pastor people. In 1963, 1991, 2006, and 2012, these groups had uprisings against the Malian government. All of these uprisings ended with peace agreements on paper, but tension continued to simmer between different ethnic groups, largely split between the northern and southern halves of Mali. In 2012, an uprising in Mali led to an improvised military coup. Junior military officers were fed up with how the nation's democratic government handled a Tuareg insurgency. Violent extremist groups capitalized on the opportunity to seize power in certain areas, and Malian armed forces have since struggled to maintain control of the area. For about 20 years prior to 2012, Mali was seen as a democratic country, but following the coup, elections had lower turnout than ever before as trust in government institutions withered away. Elections are often delayed, politicians have been kidnapped by extremist groups, and people are violently pressured into not voting. Banditry is widespread. In 2021 alone, 2,600 civilian deaths were caused by bandits. That's in addition to the thousands who die each year in the armed conflict not only in Mali, but in Burkina Faso, Chad, Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria. Because of the huge size of these nations and the struggles their government has to keep peace, many stretches of land are considered ungoverned. These lawless areas are prime hideouts for bandits and terrorist groups like Boko Haram. In Nigeria, the Sambisa, Falgore, and Adja forests have become hotspots for insurgents and bandits to launch attacks, trade arms, and to keep hostages. Park W, which spans Niger, Burkina Faso, and Benin, is considered a base for Sahelian jihadists and militants. The combination of armed violence from extremists, food insecurity, and widespread poverty led to the World Health Organization to categorize the Sahel as one of the fastest-growing crises in the world. As much of the conflict in the area relates to cross-border communities, the passing through one nation to another increases the likelihood that you might encounter a terrorist group or bandits. Because of the sparsely populated hubs in each of the countries in the Sahel region, border security is difficult to maintain. The somewhat porous borders between nations might be controlled by a nation's security forces, or they might be monitored by insurgent militants. The risk of kidnapping, burglary, and terrorist attacks is high across all of the area, particularly for foreign nationals. The unrest in the Sahel region goes to show that the borders between nations can be dangerous in their own right, but the tensions going on within a nation can make the act of leaving a bigger deal. Let's look now at some borders that are made dangerous due to civil wars happening within one nation's borders. On the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula, the country of Yemen is in the midst of a civil war. Over the last 8 years, more than 4.5 million people have been displaced from their homes. In the same time period, its economy has shrunk by 50%, and more than 80% of its populace live below the poverty line. This all began when Yemen's authoritarian president Ali Abdullah Saleh was ousted in an uprising. Power passed to his deputy Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi. Over the next few years, the Houthis, a Shia Islamist political and military organization, took over parts of Yemen and eventually overthrew President Hadi. A Saudi Arabian coalition with supporters of the former President Saleh attempted to fight the Houthis. Both sides have fired airstrikes, decimating infrastructure all over Yemen. As conflict and insurrection are everywhere in Yemen, the threat of kidnapping and terrorism is high for people passing through the nation. Unfortunately, Yemen and the Horn of Africa is one of the busiest and riskiest migration routes in the world. Travel across Yemen moves both east to west and west to east. People fleeing from conflict in the Sahel region might be trying to get away, and Yemenis might be trying to get out of Yemen. Oftentimes, people work with smugglers to help them navigate the incredibly dangerous migration routes. The Bab al-Mandab Strait between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden sees people fleeing from Ethiopia into Saudi Arabia. In English, Bab al-Mandab translates to Gate of Tears. Many people have to wait for good weather to attempt the water journey, leaving them stranded, often with no food or shelter. The strait is known for its choppy waters, and migrants oftentimes aren't crossing in large ferries. Rather, they tend to overload small vessels that are old and unsafe. Overloaded ships sometimes sink, and other times engine failure leaves people stranded. They can choose to wait or to try their luck in the waters, but only a few even know how to swim. Aside from the dangers of water travel itself, some die from thirst, hunger, extreme heat, and fatigue before even attempting to cross the border. Many people are crossing to escape armed violence, while others look to cross for the chance at a better economic future. A crisis in a nation nearby to Yemen is also prompting some of the migration waves in the Horn of Africa. Sudan, one of the nations in the Sahel region, is undergoing an extreme internal crisis. Up until 2011, Sudan and South Sudan made up Africa's largest nation. Despite decades of armed conflict, the separation of Sudan from South Sudan was a mostly peaceful change. However, self-determination did little to end the economic insecurities in both nations, making crossing its border with Chad incredibly dangerous. Since war erupted in early 2023, more than 540,000 refugees have crossed from Sudan into Chad. The Sudanese Armed Forces and a powerful paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, began fighting in Sudan's capital of Khartoum. Since the war began, civilians have been caught in the crossfire. Dozens of villages have been burned. Internet and electricity goes out sporadically. The Khartoum International Airport is closed, meaning travel into and out of the country has to be done by car or on foot. The fighting has disrupted agricultural practices in the region, leading to exacerbated levels of food insecurity and starvation. Ethnically driven violence and mass killings against the Masalit in West Darfur sparked a refugee crisis. Because of the crisis in Sudan's Darfur region, trade between Chad and Sudan is currently suspended, limiting the resources of both nations. While the border with Chad is officially closed, the urgent need for civilians to get out of the battle zones led to the use of 27 border checkpoints between Sudan and Chad in Wadai, Sila, and Wadi Fira. At these points, however, the sudden influx of people in need of essential services has created a huge strain. There's limited access to water, shelter, and health services. Most people fleeing into Chad arrive at the border in a dire situation, often leaving behind murdered relatives, decimated homes, and kidnapped children. Most of the refugees are women and children who come after long, treacherous journeys through sandstorms and extreme heat. Between May and October, the rainy season in Chad threatens to raise the level of streams and wash away some roads. This only exacerbates the challenge of supplying refugees with essential resources and makes it incredibly difficult for people to cross the border itself. The region around the border is an incredibly violent area. Partially the oil-rich Abyei region, claimed by both Sudan and South Sudan, the disputed area has become a hub of violence. For people fleeing violence in Sudan, the prevalence of violence throughout the country makes the journey west to Chad dangerous for the threat of being beaten, robbed, kidnapped, or killed by violent forces. The situation at the Chad-Sudan border is made difficult by the journey to the border and the impoverished situation waiting for people. The situation at Sudan and Chad's border is somewhat similar to Turkey and Syria's, as both of the Middle Eastern nations are dealing with their own crises that makes crossing their border a particularly harrowing activity. In 2011, Syria saw an uprising against its president Bashar al-Assad. The first Arab Spring protests in Syria were caused when a few teenagers were arrested and tortured for spraying anti-regime graffiti in the town of Daraa. People protested for their release, but eventually made their protests anti-regime in general. Shortly, Assad responded with military force against his own people. A full-scale insurgency turned into a full-on civil war. Rebel brigades took over cities through groups like Hezbollah, and militants from Iran eventually helped maintain the Assad regime through the fighting. The Russian military also intervened to support Assad, even as rebel groups like ISIS seized power in other parts of Syria. As of October of 2023, Assad's regime controls approximately 70% of Syria's territory, though fighting is still going on throughout the region. This is a bird's-eye view of what's been going on politically in the region, but for Syrians, the 10 years of fighting has taken a staggering toll. The estimated death toll is 400,000 people, but it could actually be much higher. And at various points in the conflict, more than half of the country's population was displaced. The United Nations Refugee Agency estimates that 5.6 million people have fled Syria since the fighting started. People have been put in dire situations, needing to flee immediately. All of this has put a significant strain on neighboring countries like Turkey. Turkey and Syria broke off diplomatic ties after Assad's response to the 2011 uprisings. But in total, Turkey has taken in about 3.5 million Syrian refugees, taking in more Syrian refugees than any other nation. In 2016, Turkey signed a deal with the European Union to limit migration from Syria into the EU. As the financial burdens on nations all across Europe due to the crisis in Syria have been great. Along some parts of the border between the two nations, a cement wall now separates the two, making it physically difficult to cross between them. In recent years, Syria has dealt with a fuel crisis, cholera outbreaks, and rising food insecurity, which maintains a steady flow of migrants seeking a better life across the border. Adding fuel to the flames, a series of earthquakes in 2023 rattled the area. The combined death toll in Turkey and Syria exceeds 47,000 people. In Turkey, 164,000 buildings collapsed or were damaged beyond repair. These earthquakes also damaged infrastructure that people used to migrate and damaged border crossings themselves. For people already suffering from food shortages and violence, the devastation of the earthquakes pushed even more people to need to migrate. As Turkey needed to address its own crisis, the new flood of Syrian refugees at its border created a new kind of animosity between the two nations. Turkey's land borders are protected by army border units of the Turkish armed forces. According to the Human Rights Watch, some Turkish border guards have been indiscriminately shooting at Syrian civilians on the border with Syria, as well as torturing and using excessive force against asylum seekers. Many Syrians are turned back at the border, forced to retake the long journey they took in hopes of migrating. Incidents of border guards seizing phones, beating people, and even killing adults and children have been recorded. Even when people are housed in refugee camps, soldiers have shot at them. The geography along the border also can make them difficult to cross into. In Syria, for example, winter storms bring cold and freezing temperatures to camps. People with pre-existing health conditions and young children have died in the extreme cold. The harsh geography of the Al-Ansariya mountain range in Syria makes the journey to cross the border all the more difficult. But in some places, the geography itself is a reason why crossing a border is so dangerous. The Durand Line between Afghanistan and Pakistan intersects the Pakistani provinces of Northwest Frontier Province, federally administrated tribal areas, and Balochistan. It also includes 12 provinces in Afghanistan. As the Durand Line was drawn without consideration for the Punjabi and Pashtun people, the line follows the flow of rivers and geographical divides, which meant some Afghan communities of Pashtun people were incorporated into Pakistan against their wishes. The area has become a hotspot for terrorist activity, including suicide bombers, street fighting, and airstrikes. The Pakistani government has a presence along the border and often engages in armed conflict with Taliban forces from the north. The Durand Line extends 1,600 miles through the high-altitude Karakoram Range and the Spin Gar, including the Khyber Pass. The Khyber Pass is one of the most dangerous places in the world, though it was once a well-trafficked stop along the Silk Road. Smugglers and warring communities have made it incredibly dangerous to cross. The mountain itself has steep sections and narrow roads that make it difficult to cross, especially if you're trying not to be seen. Another border, which would be difficult to cross unseen or without a huge crew, would be Antarctica's. While tens of thousands of people visit Antarctica every year, it's no easy task to reach the most remote places in the world. It's the only continent with no permanent human habitations, just temporary settlements for researchers. Technically, you don't need a visa to go to Antarctica, but you must have a permit or be with a permitted travel organization. The biggest technical hurdle in crossing into Antarctica is the cost. The average trip costs between $5,000 and $10,000. The Drake Passage takes 48 hours by boat and 2 by plane. The approximately 600-mile gap between Cape Horn and the South Shetland Islands is known for its brutally cold conditions and sometimes rough seas. Ice flows and huge swells have made water navigation difficult for adventurers historically, but with modern advancements in cruise ships, the journey is often not too bad, so long as you can bear the steep financial cost. Another border with fares, which is arguably the most dangerous border in the world, is the Darien Gap. Between Colombia and Panama, a 60-mile stretching dense rainforest makes up the most treacherous leg of one of the world's riskiest migration routes. This is the only overland path connecting South and Central America. For people migrating north with hopes of reaching the United States, the daunting stretch of lawless swamps and jungles is the only way to get where they want to go. The Darien Gap is the only break in the Pan American Highway. The majority of people aiming to cross the Darien Gap are from Venezuela, where people are escaping an economic crisis so bad that the average person cannot even afford to purchase the bare necessities. Violence also drives many people to flee in search for a better life. Other migrants hailing from Haiti and Ecuador are escaping political instability and violent crises. In 2023, it's estimated that over 20% of migrants crossing the Darien Gap were children. Some travel with family members, others with a guardian who is not a parent, and still others entirely alone. To actually cross the Darien Gap, migrants must take a ferry across the Gulf of Urabá from Necoclí to either Acandí or Capurganá. From there, they can pay local guides and smugglers fares that dictate the length and safety of the route they can take. Cheaper, longer fares cost a few $100s, while safer routes that take only a few days might be as much as $2,000. One mainland route runs from Acandí to Bajo Chiquito to Lajas Blancas. Another route spans from Capurganá to Canan Membrillo to San Vicente. There is no electricity, no shelter, and no cell phone service in the area. Once people embark on the journey, they have to get to the other side, whatever it may take. People typically run out of water within a day or two. The weight of carrying it slows people down, and the heat leaves people dehydrated quickly. When people resort to drinking water from streams and rivers, they can fall sick and become unable to finish the journey. Some people break bones and get injured navigating the thick network of roots and steep rocky inclines. Others are swept away when trying to cross fast-flowing rivers. Between January of 2012 and April of 2023, Panamanian authorities have reported finding 124 bodies in the gap. Many others, though, likely haven't been found. Criminal activity in the area leads to many robberies and surprise attacks. In the somewhat ungoverned and unmonitored areas, there are many cases of rape and sexual assault initiated by criminals working in the gap. Despite the dangers, droves of people are crossing. In 2022, 250,000 people are estimated to have crossed the Darien Gap. Between January and August of 2023, more than 500,000 have made the journey. On the other end of crossing the Darien Gap, migrants must continue on the dangerous journey to their final destination, wherever that may be. Many seek asylum in other nations, but when they reach their desired destination, immigration policies might prohibit their legal entry into a new nation. From there, people have to make decisions about where to stay in the meantime, whether to wait out the long immigration processes, risk going back home, or try to enter a nation by other means. Oftentimes, the pressures pushing people to cross dangerous borders don't disappear after they cross a line. Even for those who receive asylum status, entry into a new country means starting over, often in a new language, and with a new culture and in a new career. Rarely are people crossing dangerous borders and able to bring with them their life savings and investments. Violence and war forces people from their homes, but people often also flee due to persecution. Whether it's because of their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, or their gender, people leave their home country in search of a home where they have the freedom to live without being discriminated against. At present, there are ethnic cleansings happening all over the world. In Ethiopia, Tigrayan people have been forced from their homes and killed in large numbers. In China, Uyghur and Turkic Muslims are being imprisoned, sterilized against their will, and re-educated because of their religious beliefs. In Myanmar, the Rohingya people are denied citizenship and subjected to supposed genocide by the military. In Qatar, acts of homosexuality have been punished by the death penalty. In fact, over 70 countries around the world prosecute acts of homosexuality as a crime. Beyond discrimination against people because of their identity, countries around the world deny women equal rights. In some places, women are denied the right to visit public parks, gyms, and attend school. There's increased violence against women compared with men. Even just looking at the dangerous borders in the world, instances of rape, sexual battery, and death related to childbirth makes it far more dangerous for women to cross borders. If we zoom out to examine why there are so many dangerous borders in the world, there are usually 3 reasons people get hurt while trying to cross. 1. You're injured trying to physically navigate the border. 2. You're tortured or killed by militants. 3. You're considered an outsider and consequently a threat to national security. If we think back to the story of the soldier crossing the border in North Korea, it's unlikely that the individual was fleeing with packets of national security secrets. In fact, we have no idea what they were hoping for in trying to cross the border. Had another soldier seen him trying to cross, he wouldn't have asked too many questions before shooting. The violence is automatic at these borders, with little time taken for people to weigh the whys behind people's border crossing attempts. That is not true of all borders. Those that are safely monitored with extensive immigration processes might take the time to ask the probing questions, but some nations might not have the infrastructure or support systems in place to take care of any more people. Questions of overpopulation, immigration, social services, obligation to refugees is something that weighs on nations all over the world. There is no clear solution to the migrant crises facing many nations, just as there is no clear solution to the crises we just outlined that are linked to the world's most dangerous borders. From the mountains of Pakistan to the jungles of Panama, dangerous borders can be found all over the world. Their presence reflects the many conflicts and devastating situations making life difficult for people who are just trying to live their lives. While crossing a border might seem like a milestone achievement and feel like a big step towards a better future, borders themselves are often as dangerous as the situations the people are leaving. Thanks for watching. Now feel free to check out why these are the most dangerous countries in the world, or what the safest place on Earth is.